Hey, welcome to Mikey's Video Game Madness. Today we're playing Batman Returns on the Super Nintendo. This is based on the film that was a sequel to the 1989 Tim Burton Batman film. This might be actually based on my personal favorite Batman film. I go back and forth between the 89 and Batman Returns, but I feel like Tim Burton finally got to make the movie that he wanted to with Batman, and I really like the villains in this as much as I do the Joker. And not only does this have my favorite iteration of Batman, because I think Michael Keaton is an amazing actor, it also has my favorite iteration of Catwoman, which I really like. She's not traditional like the comic book Catwoman that was actually a cat burglar, but she's just more of this manic person that like fell a few stories and hit her head, and she's not all together there. And I love how her costume kind of represents like her manic personality with all the stitches, and it progressively gets messed up. It's homemade and all this stuff, and I really like the dark tone. I also think this is Danny Elfman's best soundtrack he ever worked on. I had trouble coming up with movies I really liked as a kid. I said Indiana Jones and Ghostbusters and some Disney films. I wasn't a huge Disney fan. Actually, my favorite all-time Disney film, which I don't actually even own, which I wish I did, was Pinocchio, because it was just so bizarre to me personally, like especially with the scenes of being swallowed up by a whale and all those kids turning into jackasses and stuff like that. It was just really weird and bizarre, and the animation back then for Disney was top notch. I don't think they ever got their groove back as time went on. I mean, they had Aladdin and the Lion King, but if you go back to like Snow White, Cinderella, and Sleeping Beauty, whether you like those films or not, like I feel like the animation is just so much more fluid, and it just, I don't know, it just has more of a classic look and stuff like that. My sister bought The Little Mermaid when it came out on DVD. That actually looked halfway decent compared to Disney's later efforts. They're all good family films, but anyway, the Batman movies were some of my favorite, and even though I didn't realize it as a kid, I was a fan of Tim Burton produces now, and disappointing to see some older and I don't know, more picky. I don't know, but I was a huge fan of Pee-wee's Big Adventure. Tim Burton didn't make the sequel Big Top Pee-wee, but that was actually enjoyable for me as a kid. I also enjoyed the original Frankenweenie. I heard the new one was actually pretty good. I have not had a chance to watch it, but I have no doubts because that was like one of Tim Burton's first major efforts at film, and I don't think he would screw that up, and it's based on one of his older stories. But with Dark Shadows, I wasn't a fan of Planet of the Apes. I do like the newer Planet of the Apes movies. I can't think of any of the titles except Rise of the Planet of the Apes, and I think the other one was called Dawn of the Planet of the Apes, but I didn't like the Tim Burton version. I like the original 60s version, but I don't know, the Tim Burton version didn't jive with me. Charlie and the Chocolate Factory was kind of disappointing. Big Fish was okay. But no, like I remember being a huge fan of Beetlejuice, the Batman films, and Frankenweenie and Pee-wee's Big Adventure and Edward Scissorhands. I just really liked his style back then. A lot of people give him exclusive credit for A Nightmare Before Christmas, but he only kind of sort of designed the characters and came up with the basic story. But I believe the real talent behind that movie, I can't think of his name, which is really sad because I'm trying to give him props right now, was the actual director and creator of the stop motion, who went on to make James and the Giant Peach and one of my favorite family type of movies, because I like all genres, even if they're geared towards families or whatever. If it's a good story or if it's visually interesting, I really don't care, as long as it's enjoyable and affects you some way positively on an emotional level or whatever. Even a sad film, like, you get an experience out of it, which I would still consider it positive, because it's a successful film. So maybe positive's not the right word, but a movie that touches you on an emotional level. But anyway, yeah, had a brain fart there, but I really liked Coraline and stuff like that. And I never got to see Paranorman. That's another one. All these movies are in 3D too. I'd really like to see the 3D movies, because seeing Coraline, I don't have the real 3D version. I have the one with the anaglyph glasses, which are the paper glasses with the different colors in them. And that looked really good, so I can only imagine the 3D Blu-ray looks amazing, which I would like to have. I have a Blu-ray that's in 3D, but it uses the anaglyph glasses because it was before the 3D TVs, but they actually made another edition. That was actually written by Neil Gaiman, who actually, I hope I said his name right, who actually wrote the Sandman series of comic books, which I personally have always wanted to get into. There's several issues. It's sort of overwhelming to hop into it, but it's something that I would eventually like to read. I've seen like the character designs and read the synopsis and stuff like that, and I really dig it. It seems really cool, and Coraline kind of reminds me of the old Brother Grimm tales before like Disney changed them all to be more family friendly, where they're kind of grim and stuff like that. So even though Coraline's a family movie, it's also really dark, and I just really love the stop motion animation. They just recently came out with a movie, I can't think of the title, but that one looks really cool too. I'm really hoping, even though the 3D format isn't as popular and they're really not making as many 3D TVs, they at least come out with some of these newer 3D movies that they're coming out with, because they look amazing in 3D, and I don't always get to go to the theater, so I would like to eventually hopefully enjoy these movies at home, and that would be one of them. I can't think of it. It's like that. It almost looks like CGI, but it's all stop motion with that girl, and there's like this big skeleton and stuff like that. It's whatever's playing in the theater of this recording that looks like that. I can't think of it. I keep on thinking of Korra or something like that, but I think that's a different thing. I get it all. There's so many movies and things that come out. I get the names mixed up. Like if I saw the film, the name, and it was a good film, the name would probably stick in my head. So this is a beat 'em up, as you can see, in the vein of like Double Dragon or Streets of Rage or the Ninja Turtle games, which Konami also made. This is when Konami was on the top of their game. I remember not having a Super Nintendo and being a huge fan of Batman Returns. Like when I saw Batman Returns, it blew my mind. I wanted to see it in the theater so bad, and my parents couldn't afford to take me, and my mom was pretty adamant about watching the news and buying into, if kids watch this, it's gonna make them all messed up and do violent shit all the time. Not that my mom would think that, but if the news said it was inappropriate, she was kind of wary about me seeing things like that. And Batman Returns, although a very comic book like film, it definitely had its extremely dark moments, which kind of conflicted with the tone of the film. And I can imagine like parents taking their kids to go see the film, and maybe they didn't see the 1989 Batman, and they're thinking, because a lot of parents always, well, during that time, think of Batman from the 1960s television show, that's the Batman that they know, so they think it's just a modern version of that, where Batman wasn't like that in the comics for a long time. Then they came out with a comic book code, and then they had to take out anything that was offensive because they were trying to, kind of like what they do with video games and stuff now, where they're like, comic books are messing up kids, it's going to make them start doing violent acts and stuff like that. You know how they blame everything on violent movies and video games today. Well, they did that with comic books back in the 50s, so they changed everything. Like, and that went on probably until maybe the mid 70s, where Batman was lighthearted. I mean, he had cartoon shows that still stuck to it, but when the 60s TV show came out, the comic book writers capitalized on the 60s TV show and then made it upbeat as well, where it's really campy and cheesy and nobody dies and stuff like that, which as a kid I thought was great. That's the Batman I was used to. And I remember the first time I saw the 1989 Batman, as cool as it looked, I wasn't really into it because in my head, like many of the parents, the Batman I knew was the Adam West Batman, where it was all lighthearted. So it took a couple of years for me to really appreciate it. And then by the time Batman Returns came out, which I didn't know because I didn't go to the theaters all the time, we rented this movie called Curly Sue. I don't even remember what it was about. I think it was about this family that adopts this eccentric orphan girl. Maybe she's not an orphan or something, but it's like this eccentric little girl that's more like an adult than a kid. I don't know. I don't remember much about the movie, but I remember when we rented it, before the movie came on, it showed a trailer of Batman Returns, which I was a kid. Like, I didn't know this was coming out, and to see a follow-up of it and seeing the creepy images of the Penguin, which the makeup was really good for Danny DeVito. It barely looks like him until you hear him talk and stuff, and then you can kind of tell it's him. But it just looked a lot scarier and more grim and so different and familiar at the same time of the 1989 Batman. I was just blown away. I didn't care about the movie that we actually rented. I just rewind the trailer over and over and over and over again. And then my cousin got to go see it, and then I would like basically interrogate him about how awesome the movie was and all this stuff. And then I finally got to see the movie, and I absolutely adored it, and probably weared out my VHS tape beyond repair watching it. So Batman Returns is really, it might be my favorite Batman movie. I mean, 89 is close, but after Batman Returns, then the amazing animated series, which I also really adored, came out, and that's really the time where I really fell in love with the character. I really liked the 1989 Batman movie and character. I liked the 60s version, but I became a true fan like after Batman Returns, and whether people think it's silly or not, that was the pivotal Batman film for me. Everybody has their version of Batman, their version of the Batmobile and stuff like that, and I just love the Tim Burton, Michael Keaton Batman movies. And I remember then when Batman Forever came out, I didn't hate it, but it just didn't feel right. I actually got a 4-disc Blu-ray set, and I have yet to watch Batman Forever and Batman and Robin, because the only reason why I got the 4-disc Blu-ray set is because it came with Batman Returns and the 1989 Batman, and those are the only films I care about. Maybe eventually I'll watch them. Batman and Robin is really close to the 60s series, except somehow worse. And not somehow worse. The 60s series was good for its time and for what it is. Like, Batman and Robin, I think it's just a straight up bad movie. And it's like they didn't try, but there's so much money poured into it. I don't get it. And then Batman Forever kind of feels like, I don't know, it's stuck in limbo. It sort of wants to be like the Tim Burton movies, but it goes in the campy side, and I don't know, I don't like the all the fluorescent colors of the movie and all that shit. They just lost the tone. I remember seeing it in the theater and thinking it was okay for what it was, but it kind of gave me the same feeling when I first saw Indiana Jones and the Crystal Skulls, where it was enjoyable at times, but at the same time I kind of had this unsettling feeling in my stomach, even though it's a stupid movie. Not stupid as in the movie itself is stupid, but I mean, you shouldn't get sick over your stomach over movies or whatever, but it's not, I guess, what my expectations are. And I guess sometimes you should just not go in to movies with expectations and just watch them for what they are and then come to your own conclusion. But I put this game on easy so I could show you more of it. I do horrible at this game on this particular playthrough because I haven't played this in probably like 10 years. Like, at least seriously, I might have popped it in to make sure the Super Nintendo and shit still worked. But as for playing it seriously, I haven't played it in a long time. I can get to the end of the game, I believe on normal, if I remember correctly. But you know, when you don't play something for a long time, like, your skill level degrades back to the first time you played it. And this is pretty much an accurate representation of probably what it was like when I first played the game. But I can get pretty far on it, and I'm sure it's easy for me to say on YouTube or whatever and not have any proof and just expect you to take my word for it, but that's the best I can do. I'm usually not this terrible, but that's after playing the game for many hours, and I get used to it and how it is, and not playing these types of games for a while, plus being stuck on playing PlayStation 4 games and PlayStation 3 games and Xbox 360 games. You know, they're different types of games, so when you go back to this, it almost feels foreign and you have to reteach yourself. The only games I've ever played that I can stay consistent with is probably the Mario and Castlevania games. I don't know why. Maybe it's because it's what I spent the most time on. I don't know. But I really like this game. This is actually the first Batman game where he was actually in his black suit, even though he was supposed to be in like the NES versions and stuff like that. They didn't have as much color, so they would always color Batman blue. I remember going to the video store and owning an NES but not a Super NES, and always looking at the back of the Super Nintendo boxes and envy. And it's crazy to think I used to look at the back of this game and think it looked photorealistic. And the reason they were able to get Batman based on the Tim Burton films with a black suit is because the Super Nintendo was able to display 256 colors at the same time. I believe the NES could do 13, correct me if I'm wrong. And then the Sega Genesis, I believe, could only do 64 colors. The Sega Genesis would try to get more colors by putting in a different color between every pixel. For instance, if they wanted purple, instead of using purple out of their color palette, they would take one pixel and make it blue, the next pixel would be red, and the next pixel would be blue, and the next pixel would be red, and so forth. And then with a CRT television, which wasn't as sharp back then, the television would actually blur the colors together, and it would thus create purple. So sometimes when you go back to play some of these older games, you'll see like this checkerboard pattern on games that you never saw before with the sharper image, but on a CRT television that would have just been one solid color. So that's one way the Sega Genesis got out of it. One thing the Sega Genesis actually did better than the Super Nintendo was it had a faster processor. So a lot of these earlier Super Nintendo games had a lot of slowdown, which the Sega Genesis didn't have, but the Super Nintendo had a better sound chip, more color, and it was able to scale, which is being able to zoom in sprites back and forth and rotate them. For instance, games like Doom and stuff like that. But now with really talented programmers, I saw a year or two ago they were able to port Castle Wolfenstein 3D on the Sega Genesis, and it actually looked better than the Super Nintendo version of Castle Wolfenstein, even though that one kind of had its own faults anyway because it was heavily censored. They like took out all the swastikas, they turned the dogs and the rats and other weird shit. But yeah, like it blows my mind. The Super Nintendo version's a little bit colorful, but the scaling and everything's like way better. So here I normally don't get my ass kicked. I usually can get to the end of the game, but you'll see how well I do. Like I don't know what I'm doing because I haven't played this game in a long time. And even though I spent a lot of time when this game was newer, and I got fairly good at it, I don't think I ever beat it, but I got close to it. And I got way farther than this, of course, but again, you'd have to take my word for it, but not used to playing these games, which is why I set it to easy and stuff like that. I did the same thing with Star Wars, because I want to show you more than one level. I don't even know how much harder the normal difficulty is versus the easy difficulty, but I get my ass handed to me. Usually the only time I have a problem, even when I was good, was sometimes I'd have difficulty with Catwoman because she was kind of fast, and that's usually where my life would drain and stuff like that. But it's really awesome that they were able to use the music from the films. You don't see any other game. Batman Returns came out, some version of Batman Returns came out on just about every console imaginable. The only one I can think of that didn't get a port, which kind of surprises me, is the Game Boy, and each game had its own version of this game, so each version of Batman Returns was different. The NES version of Batman Returns is actually really good and really pushes the NES, and I played the shit out of that game and tried to pretend I was playing the Super Nintendo version. But there's different parts of this game. As you saw, there's the beat 'em up section, the action section with the batarangs, and then later on there's a Batmobile section. This is my favorite Batman game until the Batman Arkham series came out, so this is a pretty awesome game. I highly recommend it if you have a Super Nintendo or you're a Batman fan or a fan of the Tim Burton Batman films. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you're all doing well. Take care, guys. Bye.
If you want to, like, comment, and subscribe. Thanks for watching.